So just be mindful.
You want to introduce me, or how's it gonna go?
Yep, I'll introduce you.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. My name is Thomas Varela. I serve as the Director of Advocacy and Communications for the Urban League of Philadelphia. We're excited to bring this conversation to you this evening. We recognize that this election is very important. We know all elections matter, so it's really important for everyone to understand the candidates, more importantly, understand the issues and make sure that they're informed and ready to exercise their vote on May 18th. This event is brought to you by the Make Black Count Coalition. The coalition is a group of nonpartisan organizations that are focused on ensuring that African-American communities in the Philadelphia region exercise their right to vote. The coalition is comprised of several organizations, including the Philadelphia Labor Union Women, Norristown Men of Excellence, the Road Chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, My Family Votes, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Pennsylvania chapter, the Urban League of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia chapter of the 100 Black Men organization, I Buy Black platform, the Urban Ed Advocates platform, and then the Pennsylvania State, NAACP Pennsylvania State Conference. For this event, we also want to thank Common Cause PA for being an event partner, along with the National Panhellenic Council of the Philadelphia, Southeastern Pennsylvania. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook to stay informed on all events and activities that we have within our organization. At this time, I'm going to introduce our featured speaker, and we go right into the presentation. Khalif Ali is a Pittsburgh resident with an extensive background in community organizing, engagement, and public policy. He has been working closely with community-based organizations, local government, foundations, and individual activists to craft and advance a progressive policy and advocacy agenda. Vulnerable populations are at the center of his work. Most recently, he was a director of public policy and advocacy for the Pittsburgh Foundation, where he advanced the policy agenda of the foundation. During his 3.5 years with the foundation, Khalif was able to play a role in the passing of 2 major pieces of legislation at the state level and a change in the state's congressional redistricting laws. Khalif is a graduate of Point Park University with a Bachelor of Science in Communications. In 2008, he earned his MSW in Community Organizing and Social Administration from the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work. Khalif also received an Executive Education Certificate in Behavioral Insight in Public Policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Khalif currently serves as the Executive Director of Common Cause PA. And Khalif Ali, we're excited to have you join us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. First, let me begin by thanking all of the organizations who were a part of making this event a reality. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. What I'm going to do is share my screen so that we can kind of walk through this this PowerPoint. Okay, so to begin with, just a brief overview. The organization I work for is a national organization that has offices in 30 states, including Pennsylvania. We're basically an organization that focuses on upholding, like I said, the core values of American democracy. And the core value that we're most focused on is ensuring that the voice of the people is heard, all of the people are heard. So a lot of the work we do focuses on voice and people's level of participation and willingness to participate in democracy in this country. So the first position that I want to talk about is District Attorney. I think this is a really critical position. It's one that we've often taken for granted in Allegheny County. But we'll get into why that is in 1 second. Okay, so when we think about the Philadelphia District Attorney, definitely the largest prosecutor's office in Pennsylvania. Philly's the largest city and county in Pennsylvania, so that makes sense. It's a 4-year term. So every 4 years, that position or that office comes up for re-election. And it represents the city and county of Philadelphia. So when you think about the district attorney, you're talking about an individual who is going to prosecute all criminal matters that occur in Philadelphia County. They're a close partner with the police, so that makes sense because police make the arrests that lead to the charges, that lead to the prosecution of individuals in Philadelphia County in particular. So this is a position that's crucial because of the district attorney determines who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. This would include everyone. This includes police officers. This includes the regular person on the street. So this is the person who the police will bring someone that they want convicted and put in jail for a period of time or in prison for a significant period of time. So again, just a very critical position. So your current district attorney is Larry Krasner. He's considered probably one of the most liberal district attorneys in the United States, meaning that he has a different outlook on what it means to be a prosecutor or what it means to diminish or reduce crime in a particular city. He doesn't believe his thought process is that he doesn't necessarily believe that prison or jail is the solution for every single crime that occurs in Philadelphia County. So he believes in treatment. He believes in rehabilitation centers, drug rehab centers, all of these different alternatives to prison. That's why he's considered one of the more liberal of the DAs definitely in the state and by far probably even in the country. So he's been in office since 2018. He took over after the resignation of your previous district attorney who was brought up on charges of bribery and a whole ton of other things. But if we could just take a minute to think about the importance of the DA's office, in light of the current climate with regard to police violence towards the African American community, the prosecutor, the DA, is the one who would determine whether or not that police officer, any police officer who committed a crime, would be prosecuted. We know if there's a very close relationship with the DA's office and the police department, sometimes those indictments, those charges don't always come through. So it's always, when this position comes up, I strongly encourage people in the community to take a close look at who the candidates are and what their platform is for criminal justice, because that's important, because it impacts DAs typically mostly impact communities of color, right? Their position is critical in terms of our livelihood and our communities, because a lot of the prosecution occurs in our communities, so it's very important to think about. In Allegheny County, we have a DA. His name is Stephen Zapala. He's been in office for a long time. I can't even remember when he got elected, but the reason that he keeps getting elected is because initially it was because there was something called the straight line party vote, and many of us as African Americans would go in and just hit the Democratic vote button and vote for Democrats across the board. And so he was in that slate, and he would automatically get all of the Democratic votes where that button was pushed. So sometimes we have to be able to distinguish between each of the candidates to determine who exactly would best serve our interests as citizens. So let's talk about the city controller. Now, this is a great position to talk about, because this is something that I really didn't even know about myself for quite some time. there's a lot of positions that you see that come up for election and people are like, I don't even know what that is, but okay, if I typically vote Democrat, I'll vote Democrat. If I typically vote Republican, I'll vote Republican. But again, this is another critical position that we need to know about because this has to do with accounting. So let's talk about what he is. So the city controller has a 4-year term, no term limits, meaning that person can run as many times as they want to and get that office as many times as they're elected. The main thing to think about is they audit the municipal government, including the school district. So what that means is this is the person that goes in and looks at the numbers, looks at the budgets, looks at the expenses, and makes sure that the city government is spending according to the plan that they shared with the city. They're spending according to their projected budget that should be that the public should be aware of. Same thing with the school district. They go in, they look at the supplies, they look at the salaries, they look at all of the money that's spent. They determine whether or not that money is being spent in a way that reflects what the school district had shared previously with the public. And if not, they call it out. So it's a very important position because it has to do with money and the way that the money is being moved around the city, and in this case, as well as the school district. And those are things that we need to know because sometimes money is being shifted in a way that doesn't make sense for everybody, in this case, in the city of Philadelphia. They also assess the viability of city financial plans. So PICA has to do with the fact that Philadelphia at one point, was one of many cities in the state of Pennsylvania that was financially in distress. And so they had to produce a spending plan that made sense considering that they had fallen into some financial distress. So the city controller says, okay, if you're going to have a spending plan where you want to, let's say, do an infrastructure project like repair one of the bridges, that has to make sense in the context of the guidelines for PICA. So, the city controller, again, is a very important position because they keep tabs on the finances of the city and the school district. So just, again, that's somebody you want to know and somebody who you want to be aware of and somebody that should be campaigning and answering questions that are of interest to you. So for Philadelphia, the current city controller is Rebecca Rhynhart. She's been in office since 2017. First term. She's coming up on the end of her first term. She's a Democrat, so she'll be seeking re-election. I think like when you think about what they call incumbents or people who are already in office and running again to stay in office, incumbents, questions about their performance. They should be able to produce documents and talk to you in very basic terms about what they do and what they've accomplished in their 4 years in office so that you can make an educated decision about whether or not this is the person I want to vote for and put in that position. So here's another critical position that I don't believe we think enough about. So judges, when we think about judges, we're talking about a number of things. So before we get to the graphic right there, judges essentially make decisions regarding the law for a number of matters, whether it be criminal, and if it's criminal, it's to determine your innocence or guilt in any particular matter. If it's civil, it's to determine whether you're liable in the situation, whether something was your fault, and depending on what it is, determining what you will have to pay in order to make up for your fault. These are very critical positions because you want individuals in those positions who understand that, although the law is the law, that there are extenuating circumstances that each person brings to a particular case that should be considered in any particular decision. But let's talk about the court system in Pennsylvania. So at the bottom there, where you see it's like light pink, you see that those are minor courts. These are the base level courts, the magistrates, the municipal courts, where you first go in if there's not a major crime happening. if you got fined or cited for putting your trash out too early, this is something that happens a lot in Pittsburgh. You got to go to court. You'll get a ticket and you got to go to court and kind of answer to that. And most of the time they just give you a fine and tell you to get out. So that's the base level court. They determine, this court is also the court that determines whether or not the crime is serious enough to advance up to the court of common pleas. Let me move forward. So let's take a look at the municipal courts. So they only deal with the lower level cases, criminal cases, maximum penalty of 5 years or less. So you're talking about some simple assault, you're talking about shoplifting, you're talking about some very basic issues that can only get you 5 years or less in prison. Prison or jail, depending on if a year or less is jail, more than a year, you're typically going to state prison. They also handle civil cases. So the maximum claim for the lower level courts is $12,000 or less. So someone wrecks your $20,000 or $30,000 car, they're going to kick that case up to the common pleas court. The same thing, landlord or tenant cases. These are the cases in the municipal courts. If you're up for eviction, you're going to land in a municipal court to determine whether or not you have to leave immediately, or the judge gives you 30 more days to pay the rent off. Whatever the case may be, those are lower court decisions. You see real estate and school taxes, max 15,000. If there's an issue if there's an appeal with regard to the taxes on your house or anything else that you're dealing with, you can take it to the municipal court. So there's 27 judges throughout the city county with regard to, we're talking about Philadelphia now, Philadelphia County City. There's also a traffic court, but let me just say, I'm not sure how many judges are up for re-election, but those are things that you want to pay close attention to, because again, you want to know, or you want to be familiar with the person's ideas on criminal justice and in terms of being a judge, how they would judge the cases, because these are real issues. If you get a civil case and it's $10,000, you don't have the money, they can put a lien, they can do a lot of different things to you that can really impact your quality of life. So you got to know the people who are going to be in these positions, because we could end up in standing before these judges. So these are ones, again, that you want to pay close attention to. Municipal court, municipal judges, you want to pay close attention to that. So again, keep in mind, remember those numbers from before. If the numbers are above, in terms of if you're going to spend more than 5 years in prison, if you're filing a claim above $12,000, it's going to kick up to common pleas court, right? So there's 3 sections. There's the family section, family court. Really, that's anything related to child support, custody, anything along those lines that have to do with families, divorce. All those things are family courts. Orphans. I think that's a horrible name to call people, children who may or may not have parents, or at least their parents aren't in their lives at that point. That's a section all on its own. And then just general trial court, which has to do with civil and criminal, that are both civil and criminal. Again, what we talked about before, if it's above $12,000, you're going to see yourself in common pleas court. And if you stand to spend more than 5 years in prison, you're going to be in common pleas court as well, on the criminal side, not the civil side of it, right? So they hear the appeals from minor courts. So that means that if they're saying this happened, we got to kick this up. So the common pleas court the judge will determine whether or not this is actually a viable case for common pleas court, meaning should this case be here, or should it go back down to municipal court? If it stays here, then it's going to fall in one of those 3 categories. So cases can be heard either by judge or jury. You can make that decision. You can say that I only want the judge to make the decision whether I'm guilty or innocent. That's critical that's a critical reason to know who these judges are. They hear criminal and civil matters. We talked about that. and they serve 10-year terms. So keep that in mind. So when you put someone in office, when you vote for someone and they go into common pleas court, they're going to be there for at least 10 years. Good, bad decision, indifferent, any decision, whatever you think about the decisions, they'll be there for 10 years unless they do something like totally inappropriate, like accept money or take a bribe or anything along those lines. But that's something to really take into consideration. 10 years is a long time to put the wrong person in a position who will continuously make bad decisions for 10 years straight. So again, it's a critical part of your responsibility as a citizen of the Commonwealth and a citizen of this country is to be very familiar with the individuals that you decide to cast your vote for. I think what helps is forums like this that allow you to be able to clearly understand what the function of each of these offices are. When you understand the function, you can begin to ask the questions that you need that kind of relate to your priorities. So now that you know about the municipal court judges, you know that there's these low-level offenses that can go to the court, and that's where you'll also find yourself in terms of traffic infractions, and you'll find yourself, if you're close to eviction, you'll find yourself in those lower courts. So you want to have somebody who will be understanding and sort of community friendly. If you have a judge in there in those areas that is sort of sympathetic to business owners and businesses, and you go in there for a dispute with your landlord, you might not come out too well, right? Now, typically what we expect is for the judges to be impartial, meaning they're only going to look at the case based on their interpretation of the law, and they will render their decision based on their interpretation of the law and considering all the facts of the case. That's the ideal situation. But yet and still, you want to know the person who's going to have that much power potentially in your life. So you want to know that person. So here's an interesting one. The judge of elections. So when you walk into your poll, right? You walk into your polling station. You see a number of people who are checking to see that you are the person that you say you are. You see, there's electronic voting stations in certain places, or other people who, if you went to the polling station in November, you see other people filling out their vote by mail form who didn't get their vote by mail form. All of that, everything that's going on, the people, the order, the placing of the machines, that is done by the judge of elections, right? So what they do is they handle the conduct of the polling place and the personnel. They get in there early in the morning. They set up they help get things organized. They tell people where they're going to be. You're going to be over here registering people, checking people's making sure that they are who they are. You're going to direct people to the voting machines, and they're going to be directing people. That's what they do. So their job is also to prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse. And they do that by only accepting people in that space who are appropriately registered. So if you're not registered, you're not supposed to be there, and that'll be the situation. They'll ask you to leave. They're solely responsible for preventing fraud, because they're going to check and verify that you are who you are. They're going to also be the ones who count the votes. They're going to say how many votes came out of this particular precinct, and they're going to send it to the county election board. They open and close polls. They're the first ones there, and they're the last ones to leave. So that's the judges of election. They're pretty much the managers, the supervisors over the polling stations. So you have the majority and minority inspectors. So what they do is they just make sure I'm Khalif Ali. I go in there, I tell them my name, give them my address. They check and make sure I am who I am. And then they give me the little ticket that authorizes me to vote. I take it over to the person who's stationed at the voting machines, and I give them my ticket, and then I'm off to the races. I do what I need to do. There are also individuals who check for for voting machine accuracy. And that comes in a number of ways. If they're familiar with the machines, they know the functioning of those machines, and they're able to tell whether or not it's accurate. Some polling stations, some precincts have paper copies to kind of compare to make sure that things are accurate. Both the inspectors and the judge of elections have 4-year terms. They're elected positions. So here's something for you to think about. When you cast your vote, you want to be you're going into your precinct to cast your vote. You want to know the people who are in there. You want to know that those are individuals that are responsible and that are going to ensure that your vote is counted. And they're also going to ensure that everyone else's vote is counted. And they're going to make sure that the people who are supposed to be there are the only ones that come through there. So these are very serious positions, and you want to pay attention to who's being placed in those positions. And you should be familiar with them. They're more than likely going to be someone from your neighborhood, somewhere close by. So you may actually know who it is when you go to vote. But these are people who should also let it be known in the community that, hey, I'm running for these positions. Here's why you should vote for me. And that's the importance of, again, the forums like these, is that it pushes us to become familiar with the positions that we're voting for, and it pushes those who are running for office to actually get out in the community, knock on doors and say, hey, this is what I'm running for, this particular office, and here's why you should vote for me. I think a lot of politicians have taken our votes for granted. They've taken and they don't feel like they need to campaign as much as they used to. But that's really the heartbeat of democracy, is those who are interested in representing us should get to know us on a personal basis. They should be knocking on our doors. They should be talking about what our priorities, concerns are. And or even if it's these positions which are directly related to voting, they should be talking about that. What was your experience like the last time you came to the polling place? What did you think about it? Were the individuals who were working, did they seem like they were trained? Did they seem like they knew what they were talking about? These are the questions that they should be asking us, and these are our experiences are what count and what we should be able to share with elected officials. So, again, critical that you become familiar. Don't go in there blind and just voting for people. We should always know what's on the slate coming up. November, by the summer, we should be thinking about who we're going to be voting for in November, what the positions are, who the candidates are. We should begin to know those things. So critical, again, that we inform ourselves. We can't go into things blind any longer, because all of these positions play a role in the quality of life that we have in these communities. So I'm gonna end it there. That's my contact information. That's the website to my org. Please feel free to contact me. I can do, these are things that I don't have a problem doing at any point for your organization or for your community group. So just let me know if you're interested, or if you have questions. I answer questions too. I'll get back to you immediately. So thank you for the opportunity to share. I'll give it back to Tomas.
Great. Thank you for joining us this evening for this important conversation. We encourage you all that are in this feed to post your questions in the Facebook Live feed. We will take questions there. But Khalif, wanted to ask the first question. When we think about the DA's race, I think that's something that's pretty particular here in Philadelphia, particularly because this time around, we don't have as many candidates. So it does provide an opportunity for individuals to take a really deep dive into the candidates right here. And on the Democratic side, you have 2 candidates, Carlos Vega and Larry Krasner, who is the incumbent. And then you have on the Republican side, Charles Perduto. For those that are looking at the Democratic side, let's say they're Democratic and they do want to vote for those 2 candidates, how do they dig deep into thinking through which side that they should be looking at, right? Because they're both technically Democrats. So how does one kind of decipher, between those 2 things, and how do they kind of conceptualize all that's happening in this world things that we see on a national level, but then also things that we see on a local level in Philadelphia?
Great question. So once you understand what the function is of the DA, which we talked about briefly, you then are able to you can connect that to some of the experiences that we're seeing across the country with the criminal justice reform, or the criminal justice system. And so, one of the things that I tend to look at is, again, considering the high level of friction between African American community and police departments across the country for the obvious reasons. One of the things that I like to know, one of the questions that I'm concerned about is the willingness of the district attorney's office to prosecute anyone with a badge or without a badge, who commits a crime. So I think you have to ask yourself, what are my experiences? Or if I don't have any experiences with the criminal justice system, what are some things that I'm concerned about regarding the criminal justice system? And and is this the right person to address some of my concerns related to the criminal justice system? I think you have to be able to come up with a few questions about what you want to see from someone in that position. And if you can get in front of them, or if they have like a platform that they're sharing out, you can look at it and see whether or not this is a person that makes sense for you. And when you talk about the incumbent, which Tomas was talking about, the person who's been there for, in this case, 3 years, ask yourself what they've done. What have they done? How has their performance impacted our communities? And if the answer is positive, then that's encouraging. That's somebody you might want to consider voting for. If their record hasn't been great, or if individuals that you've spoken to have said, like, this person hasn't done anything, or they're doing negative things in the community, then that might not be the person that you want to vote for. But I think it's easiest when you have an incumbent, because you can ask questions about, well, what have you done? How has your performance impacted our community? And ideally, these individuals should be in the community talking to you about what they plan to do over the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, because, a large majority of African Americans do not commit crimes, right? So they're not necessarily directly impacted. However, they may have friends and family that are impacted, or they may just have a certain interest in what's happening as it relates to how African Americans are policed or how African Americans are prosecuted. So they do have to kind of factor all those things as it relates to what they may be experiencing personally, but then also what does the larger African American community experience. And it's an important reminder that in Philadelphia, if you are registered as a Democrat, you have to vote for Democratic candidates. If you are registered as a Republican, you have to vote for Republican candidates in the primary. And if you are registered as an independent, you technically can't vote for the Democrat or the Republican in the primary election. That's important to remember. We're not here to necessarily say if that's a good or bad thing, but it's important to understand that distinction, that if you are registered as an independent in Philadelphia, you cannot technically vote for the Democratic candidates in the primary election. You will have the opportunity to vote for the candidates in the general election, but the primary election, May 18th, you can only vote for Democrats if you are registered as a Democrat. You can only vote for Republicans if you're registered as a Republican. So I want to look at not necessarily a similar question, but when we look at the judges, I think that's another angle where judges are all fighting for your vote. They're all, they don't have the same financial backing to do some of the campaigns like a DA or a mayor and stuff like that. They all tend to go to law school. They all tend to get endorsed by the bar or some similar association. So how do you encourage people to really think critically about these judges? Many times there's judges, so many judges for so few slots. How do they really make this distinction between all these judges to ensure that they're voting for the right people? Is it simply looking at the Philadelphia Bar Association, or is it looking at the barristers and what they put out in terms of thinking about the Black lawyers? How do they kind of think through that?
That's another great question. It's tough. I think one of the main things that we really relied on at certain points was that there were either events in which all of the candidates were able to kind of share their thoughts on issues that are considered priorities by the community. These candidates, we typically expect candidates again to do some campaigning at least, maybe knocking on a few doors, maybe holding or even better yet, having like someone from the community to invite people into their house to have a discussion about candidates. Those things just don't happen as often as they used to. And when there's a slew of candidates, you can look to the Bar Association to see, to get some information on them. But if it's a person who's just been an attorney and hasn't been a judge at any point in time, it's hard to really determine whether or not their decisions are going to be in line with something with how you see or your values when it comes to the criminal justice system. Judges are the toughest ones to determine unless it's like a municipal court judge who's now seeking a higher court, like the common pleas judge, because you can clearly look at the record of a municipal judge and say, oh, okay, they're hard on vulnerable populations or people of color, or they're great with us, or they're fair. He's hard, but he's a fair guy or a fair woman. So that's a more difficult one because you can look at the track record of an individual as an attorney, but still not going to tell you how they're going to render decisions or how they're going to weigh certain decisions. So it would be tough. The best way to get it is the best. I say the best way to determine about the whether or not you should vote for a judge is if they've come from a lower court and they're trying to go to a higher court. So Dwayne Woodruff, who was on this side of the state, he was a great family court judge, and we knew his record. And to be honest, people liked him because he was a former Steeler as well. But he was a great family court judge by all accounts, hands down. He was running for the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in Pennsylvania. I voted for him because he had a stellar track record in family court, and I thought he would be a great candidate for Pennsylvania Supreme Court. He didn't get elected, unfortunately, but that's the way you typically want to do it. Is you want to do that, or you want to ask organizations like the Urban League to organize a campaign a candidate forum. I just recently moderated a conversation with the candidates for mayor, Democratic candidates for mayor here in Pittsburgh, which if you were in the Democratic primary in Pittsburgh, you win a mayor's race. But so you gotta have more forums like that where you can ask those questions, I think.
Great. And one thing that I want to bring up, and I'd be remiss if I that I didn't mention earlier when we talked about DAs. I think that's something that's very critical when we think about the district's attorney, when we think about Ferguson, right, with Mike Brown and the killing of Mike Brown. There was a big concern with that DA where people felt that he was too close to the police, and that was a prime example where they were able to vote him out and put in a new district attorney. So that just illustrated the power of the vote. And even when we look at Ahmaud Arbery in the most recent election, the district attorney in that area was a county district attorney. And I bring that up because the town in which Ahmaud Arbery was killed was a pretty heavy minority populated town, but the district attorney was technically a county attorney for a larger region that didn't have the same concentration of African Americans. So there was this fear that this district attorney wouldn't be able to remove them from office, but people spoke up, they mobilized there, and they decided that the county attorney was not the best candidate based on the track record that I assume included the handling of the Ahmaud Arbery case. So that's just an example of the power of your vote, particularly in these smaller elections where not as many people unfortunately vote. You can actually make a difference in influencing the results because there's fewer votes out there versus like presidential elections. So many people vote, So in order to move the needle, it takes a lot of people to vote, whereas these DA races, you can actually influence, like there's a greater chance of influence because there's less
Yes,
people
yes.
voting.
Great point. Great point. I think
As a
it's
reminder to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no. I was just going to say I think it's much easier for us to do the federal elections because we see faces plastered across TV. There's like everybody knew who Joe Biden was. Everybody knew who Donald Trump was because of the heavy amount of media that was given to those candidates. We have to be just as diligent with our local candidates, as Tomas was saying. They're not going to. They're probably not going to have the type of money to put themselves on television like that. But their roles are just as important. And we actually have a much greater chance of changing circumstances with regard to those offices locally. But we tend to, you know, pull away or not actively participate. The mayor of Pittsburgh was elected with 25,000 votes um, the last time around, and that's abysmal. That's abysmal. There's two things to think about. One, low level of participation. Two, if there's a candidate that can actually get people motivated to get to the polls, there could be a challenge, right? And that's just what we need to think about is that there's no greater power than going to the polls for local elections, I think. So, I mean, Tomas makes a great point.
No, definitely. And as they say, all politics is local. So being able to have that influence, you can have that direct change. And it's important to understand the synergy between federal elections and local. Once again, I want to thank Khalif for joining us this evening. This is a production of the Make Black Count Coalition of Southeastern Pennsylvania. We encourage you to like us on Facebook and follow the organizations that are part of the coalition. If you're an organization that is nonpartisan in nature and focus exclusively and primarily on empowering African Americans to exercise their right to vote, we encourage you to reach out to us and learn more about joining the coalition. What are some important things, Khalif, that you would say when we think about mobilizing others to get involved in this election and just get involved in general? What would be some tips that you would say people can use, particularly when this is one, as we talked about, an election that a lot of people don't pay attention to, not as many people will vote? How do people mobilize their community to vote? What are some tips? What are some suggestions that you have?
I think one of the issues that we tend to see in the African American community is that we generate motivation off of emotion. So if we're angry at somebody, we get to the polls and we make sure that we let them know we'll march, we'll do all these things. But we need to understand that those aren't sustainable emotions. So we can't hope to continue to run off of these emotions in order to motivate us to get to the polls and do what we need to do. So instead, we need to be able to educate ourselves in a way that's motivating. Knowing and understanding the function of these offices, knowing and understanding the candidates and their position on issues that matter most to us. When we talk about mobilizing, one of the things that I think about is, I'm not an old guy, but I can remember clearly when I had here and I was going to the barbershop, the conversations that we had in those barbershops were all about politics. Politics in the sense of everybody was talking about what was going on in the neighborhood, and not only what was going on, who was doing it, and what we needed to do to address it. And sometimes when we talk about something that needed to be addressed by the councilman or the mayor, those were things that we talked about, and people were organized, even in barbershops and in beauty salons. But the point I'm trying to make is that we can't just have these conversations in these forums and expect things to change. We have to be able to take these conversations out into our neighborhood and have these conversations with neighbors, individuals that we know, and talk to them about what our priorities are. And what we'll see is that there's a lot of threads that connect all of us in terms of our priority needs or things that we consider that need to be addressed, our priorities. And once we determine that, hey, those are issues that I care about too, then we begin to come together and we begin to talk about what we can possibly do to change those circumstances. I think the number one thing around mobilizing is being able to identify an issue and being able to find a role for yourself in resolving that issue. See, a lot of times we want to go to different people and say, okay, here's our issue. I need you to take care of this. But no, it doesn't work that way. We have to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do as a result of this. And I want you to play your role as well as an elected official. So being able to define what our a role for ourselves in addressing some of the priority issues in our community, we should be able to organize around those. And one of the ways that was easiest to do that was through civic associations. You know, in the communities that are organizing, you had your education committee, you had your public safety committee, you had there was one or two other ones, and through those, people began to organize. They would say, if you're interested in what's happening in education in our neighborhood, you should come to this meeting. And that's how organizing began in communities, is through civic association. That was the vehicle for it. So think about, you know, if there's a civic association in your neighborhood, think about going there and trying to give it some life, and addressing some of the major issues in your neighborhood. I would highly recommend it. But the point of the matter is you're gonna have to talk to some people. You just gonna have to. We got to start talking to each other. If we don't talk to each other, we can't organize. That's the core of organizing, is having conversations and being able to come together to resolve it.
No, definitely. And we appreciate that plug, to encourage everyone that's watching this to share this video with your network so others are able to get this information. We know we're still dealing with COVID. So as much as we want to get back outside and hang out and network, people are still balancing COVID. So, you know, we encourage you to share the video with your network so that they're able to participate and follow. I know some of the work that you do around voter suppression and education. Any thoughts on, a little bit off topic, but I think it's still relevant. Any thoughts on just what's happening with all the voter suppression and kind of the new laws and proposed laws? How are you at Common Cause internalizing all of this and trying to help educate African Americans to understand what's happening?
So it's an outright threat to democracy. So if we think about it this way, if we think about the civil rights movement, you know, what was the core purpose of the civil rights movement? You know, there were two things. I'm gonna simplify this. We're not gonna get too deep. I'm gonna simplify this. It was, one, to be seen, recognized, seen as a human being, and two, to be heard, the right to vote without any type of barriers that were specifically designed to prevent us from voting. So to be seen and to be heard are two critical pieces of what we needed as African Americans to be able to do anything. You got to be seen, you got to be heard, and the Voting Rights Act has been kind of gutted since then. But the point is that there is no power if you're not heard. Even if I see you, if you ain't saying nothing, if you're in a corner, I can ignore you. There's nothing there, you know. But we have to be seen and we have to be heard. So it's critical that we take a look at these voter restriction bills, because they ultimately fall to us. They ultimately have the highest impact in our communities. So we have to be vigilant, and we have to, you know, let it be known that these are not something that we approve of. Now, we're fortunate in Pennsylvania to have a Democratic governor who's not going to give any airtime to any of these bills for the most part. If you're living in Georgia, you know, they just rolled back time 30 years in Georgia with those water restriction bills. You know, they can say what they need to say in terms of this being just voter security and all these different things, but we all know that these are bills that are going to impact the ability and the willingness of African Americans to vote in Georgia. Thankfully, we don't have that here. We need to keep that in mind, though, for the next governor's race, to make sure there's another governor, Democratic governor, in place, because we have a Republican-controlled Senate and House that's going to continue to produce these type of bills to restrict our voice. And without voice, there's no power without voice. So we got to keep that in mind.
Definitely, definitely. And that's why it's important to stay engaged. I know the Make Black Count Coalition last couple of months, we held an event on judicial gerrymandering, just continuing to illustrate some of these nuanced issues that sometimes don't get a large amplification on social media. And it's important to ensure that we are thinking critically about all these issues, those that are large scale, but then also these nuanced conversations that if you're not paying attention, you will miss out. And I'll be remiss We didn't have this on the agenda, so I do apologize. Don't forget there are ballot questions on the election. Um, Please make sure that you pay attention to those ballot questions and really look into the detail. There are platforms like Committee of 70 and others that do nonpartisan explanation of those ballot questions. Please make sure that you're reading through that because those questions can sometimes be tricky in terms of how they phrase it, because a lot of times it's an interpretation of the Constitution. So just make sure that you're staying abreast of all that. So we're going to close out. Khalif, wanted to see if there's any final thoughts you would like to say before we close out.
So, and I wanted to say to everyone, I know it seems like a lot, checking out these candidates, seeing who they are, talking to other people, trying to organize and, get people to act. It's a lot. It does seem like a lot, but let me tell you from firsthand experience that there are people who rely on you not to read those ballot questions. There are people who rely on you not to know who you're voting for. There are people who rely on you not to fight when your voice is at stake. And they don't have a problem if you don't want to act, because they'll take it from there. When we don't act, we allow people who we put in office to set the agenda, and that's just not how it goes. Nobody knows what the agenda should be better than you. So we can't allow these elected officials to make these unilateral decisions without us. So keep that in mind, and just when you think that it seems to be too much, just remember that without you, if you don't set the agenda, it'll be set for you. So I'll just leave it at that.
I think that's important to remember. And I think this is something that we always try to remind the community, is that elected officials, we put a lot of trust in them and we hope that they're going to do right by us. We always have to remember elected officials want you to vote for them. They're not going to always just be concerned with you voting, because you could potentially be voting for their opponent. So more importantly, they want you to vote for them. So that's why it's important that we as African Americans understand the power in our vote, but more importantly, understand the independence in our vote, and finally, make sure that we're exercising our right to vote and being informed and engaged on the issues and on the candidates, so that we're not just blindly voting for one candidate or another, or that we're not falling for any type of tricks that people may feel, political tricks that exist, that may make people feel like they're not engaged, right? Because in this climate now, we're becoming so disenchanted with with politics and elected officials, feeling like things haven't changed, things like that. But this is a big reason why things may not always change to the same degree that we would like, is because we're not as engaged in the process. We're not voting at 100%, right? No, if our community could vote at 100%, we would draw the attention of all the elected officials on all sides of the aisle, because they will see how involved we are in the process. But because we're not voting in those high numbers, it makes it easier for them to dismiss us. And we know not all populations don't vote at 100%. So I don't want to make it seem like this is a deficit for African Americans. But it is critical to remember that if our voting power is amplified and increased to a higher level, we will draw more attention from these candidates, because they will see how much we vote, and they're going to want to leverage that. So with that, I want to thank Khalif Ali, the Executive Director of Common Cause PA, for joining us this evening for this timely presentation. As a reminder, registering to vote ends May 3rd. So please make sure that you go to votespa.com to check your registration status, to register to vote, and make sure that you understand the candidates. I want to once again thank the Make Black Count Coalition of Southeastern Pennsylvania for bringing this event to everyone today. That includes Philadelphia Council, Coalition of Labor Union Women, the Norristown Men of Excellence, the Row Chapter Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, My Family Votes, Urban Ed Advocates, the Urban League of Philadelphia, the 100 Black Men of Philadelphia, I Buy Black, the NAACP Pennsylvania State Conference, and the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Pennsylvania chapter. Please make sure to follow them on social media. These are all nonpartisan organizations that are committed to nonpartisan voting participation. And I also want to thank the National Panhellenic Council, the Southeastern Pennsylvania chapter, for joining us as an event partner this evening. Please make sure to find all these organizations on social media and follow them, because it's important to get your information from trusted resources in the community and not fall trapped to the disinformation and misinformation that has plagued the African American community in 2016, 2020, and even in the current time. So with that, we'll close out. Enjoy the rest of your evening and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.